Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Densie Webb. Densie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is great.
Thank you so much. And I would love for you to start with how'd you get into writing?
Well, actually, I've been a writer and editor my whole career, but it focused on freelance health and nutrition writing. My degrees are in nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian. So that was what my focus has been all these years. And if anyone's old enough to remember, I was a health editor at McCall's Magazine years
Oh,
ago.
cool.
When I lived in New York. So it's been words and writing and editing have been my professional career, but fiction is a relatively new thing.
So then how did you make that transition between, to your point, nonfiction or even technical writing to some point, and then
Yeah.
transitioning that style and that path, if you will, to fiction?
I can't say there was an epiphany or a corner that I turned. It was just something that I had in the back of my mind that I would really like to do. And I had encouragement from some friends, just go for it. And so I did. And it's been like 7 years of working, developing craft, hopefully getting better and getting a book published. So yeah, it was a gradual process. I can't say that it was just overnight, but yeah.
But that's okay. That's okay. In fact, it's good that it wasn't necessarily
Yeah.
overnight because it's something that it is something that you keep developing because each
Yeah.
chapter, each piece comes together, and then you take that first draft and you are working it and figuring it out. And even if you're, whatever your process is, it's
Yeah.
still something that you kind of go through a few times before you decide, I'm ready to move forward with this and go
Exactly.
to the next step.
Exactly.
So would you talk a little bit about your type of process?
Well, I've said this so many times before, but I think everyone has to find their own path. There's so many craft books out there. There's so many experts, professional writers who have lots of books under their belt, and they will tell you this is the best way to do it. But I think you really have to experiment and find out what works for you. I've had editors many times tell me just vomit it out, get it out there on the paper, sort of like NaNoWriMo, very short period of time, to spill out the words, you can fix it later. But my brain just does not work that way. So I've discovered that I have to work slowly, obsessively edit as I go. And when I'm finished with a chapter, I think, okay, that's pretty good. I can move on to the next one. And that sort of goes against the grain, I think, of majority consensus as to how you're supposed to approach writing, but it works for me.
So I like that you say that you're going against the grain, that you're following the path that's right for you. So
Mhm.
how did you figure out what that was? Because to your point, when there are so many craft books, when you hear guidance, so many different pieces of guidance, and some of them say the same thing, some of them say something different.
Mhm.
And if you're just starting out, or even if you have been doing this for a while and you kind of feel stuck, like something's not clicking, what do you recommend? How do you work through that?
I think you have to try different approaches and see which one feels the most natural to you. If you try to force yourself to do, there are many things, and I'm not denigrating these, they work for a lot of people. That's like the inside outline and save the cat approach. And what is it when you have a hero's journey? I mean, there are all these different formulas for how you can write, and they just don't work for everyone. And I think if you try each one, which is a long, tedious process to get through, and see which one you feel the best about, but I think that's the only way to do it. You can't just, unless you get really lucky and the first approach works for the first approach you use works for you, that's great. But I think you really have to experiment.
And to your point about experimenting, what might work with one genre or your first book or your first attempt or your first pass might have worked for that. But then when you're going back through again, or maybe book one has one format, but a different book is you need to take a different approach. That's okay. It's really
Yeah,
about honing your own craft in writing and honing what works for you to tell the story that you're meant to tell.
exactly. Exactly. It's not easy, and you have to really, really want to do it and have a lot of patience and perseverance.
So, when you are writing each chapter, to your point, going and writing it and then obsessively editing, I really think that was so cool the way you said that. Made me
A
chuckle.
confession of sorts.
It's okay. It's okay. Um, but do you then plan out or plot out the book so that you have an idea of where everything's going, or do you like kind of the panning style of letting things kind of fly by the seat of your pants, kind of an idea, and therefore the story's guiding you, but you're still going at the pace you need to?
Well, I mean, as you well know, there are usually writers are divided into two very broad categories: plotters and pantsers. And I'm definitely more in the pantser category. But I have to say that when I start something, I usually know how I want it to start and how I want it to end. And about maybe halfway through, I don't do an outline, but I will do like bullet points, usually to make sure my timeline is correct. And I haven't, twisted something around. It hadn't happened yet. I thought it had, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's kind of it. I don't do any heavy duty plotting per se. I have done. It's not really an outline. It's more like a summary of what the story might be. And it's not even a synopsis. It's just something for me, just to write it down. I think this will happen, and then maybe this will happen, and that helps.
Yeah, yeah, that's really very cool. I like that. So, with your book, When Robins Appear,
Mhm.
would you talk a bit about that? I love the title. I just think I think that's beautiful.
I was really happy with the title I ended up coming up with. The publisher did not like my original title, which I had had for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. But yeah, I like it a lot. And I really love the cover, which was perfect for the title. Um, I, I'm trying to think of how the story started. I guess when I thought of writing the story, it was triggered by a classmate of my daughter who was in high school at the time, was in a terrible skateboard accident.
Mm.
And I thought I was going to write a story about that and his family. And so, but as what often happens, it evolved, it changed a lot. And there is skateboarding in there. And one of the characters is a skateboarder, a teenage boy. But yeah, it evolved, and it's really just a family drama and about what happens when two health crises affect the family and how they are forced to reinvent themselves in very bittersweet ways.
So, when you were working on this, how much research did you feel you needed to do, or how did you gauge your research to, for instance, with the health crisis?
Mhm.
I mean, yes, you have a background that kind of lends itself to understand nuances as
Yeah.
well as to also um, to have accuracy, especially. But how did you go about that? Would you talk a bit about the research for that?
I talked to a specialist, and he was kind enough to spend time with me on the phone and gave me a lot of information. And of course, I just read. And there's a part of it that, again, I'm not going to give that away, but my nutrition background came into play. And so it was something that I already knew existed. And I just did some, updated research to make sure I was uh, staying true to it.
So, how do you gauge, for instance, um, knowing when you've done enough research or when you need to push a little bit more? Because sometimes, for instance, if a writer knows that they need to do some kind of research, whether it's, to your, it's something along the lines of like there's a health crisis,
Mhm.
or perhaps it's set in a time frame, so historical fiction, and they're having to research that area. But some element of research is happening. And then there can be a dance between how much is truly what's necessary versus going into the it's turning into procrastination and
Yeah.
therefore not actually writing because maybe the writing has become challenging or frightening or just it's just not flowing. So it's easier to do the research. How do you balance that?
Well, I have to say that for my story, the main research was just about these specific health issues. Um, I had it take place in Austin, Texas, where I live, so I didn't have to research that, and it was modern times. So the only other thing I had to research was skateboarding. And in Austin, there's a park near downtown where they have a concrete park, and there are a lot of skateboarders there. So I went and watched them, and they probably thought I was kind of a creepy mom sitting there watching them, but I watched them. And I also did a lot of YouTube videos of skateboarders. And there's not a lot of skateboarding in it, but whatever I had in there, I wanted it to be realistic. So
So then how did you manage you knew how, like just the timing, the managing of the time so that you know you've done the research that you need versus letting it drag you too far in. So to your point, skateboarding was something new for you,
mhm.
but how did you know how to balance, okay, I've gotten what I need versus continuing down that rabbit hole that can happen?
I think that's more of a problem for historical authors. But yeah, I didn't. I think maybe my background writing about health and nutrition and having to do research and having to do interviews, I had maybe I just had more of a feel for when it's okay to stop because I
Fair
don't
enough.
feel like I went into any kind of a rabbit hole. Now there's a story that my publisher has signed me up for, and I'm working on edits now. And that was a topic that I had to do quite a bit more research. It has to do with stalking,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, so I don't have any firsthand experience with that. So I did have to do quite a bit of research, reading, and an interview with an expert. So but that was fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think it's cool that whether you pick a topic you are genuinely interested in learning more about, or a topic's given to you and then
Yeah,
you find a way to make it interesting. I do think that the research element of it, the investigating part of it to figure out what's going to fit within the story, what do you need or what you don't need, because it's
yeah,
just as important to know what not to include as what to
exactly.
include. So I do think that's really cool. That is really neat. So how would you talk about developing characters, please? How did you go about that for when robins appear?
Well, I think one, I not I think I know one of the inspirations for the young character is my own daughter. We have a very close relationship, and so it was just a mother-daughter interaction that felt familiar to me, and so that was not difficult. There's a bad guy in there, which you just sort of let your imagination go. I don't really know anyone like that, but yeah, I don't know. I think when I develop characters, they sort of, I don't believe in this, my characters were talking to me sort of thing. I'm too dogmatic for that, I think.
Okay.
But they do evolve. And I think it's just a combination of people that you've known all your life, movies, other books, and they just sort of become an amalgamation of this character, and things that you've picked from here and there fit. Um, I don't do character drafts.
Hmm.
Some people like to sit down and
Mhm.
do the whole backstory of their character, even if it's not going to end up in the book. I don't do that either. I just kind of dive in.
But I like that though. I like how you're sharing other ways to look at writing a book, writing the story that you want to tell. That if you feel like there's a way to tell that story, that you don't have to go about it in what is being taught, so to speak, then that's okay. And to carve the path that works for you and go back and keep checking in with yourself. Is this still this is this still aligning? Is this still a good story to be telling, a good story to be
Yeah.
following?
Well, I will say, and this is a major caveat, that mine is not the most efficient way. You know, you have writers that can spin out 2 books a year. and they can't do it my way if they're going to write 2 books a year. So if you want to be a prolific writer, my process is probably not the best one.
But that's okay. That, I mean, again, it depends upon what you're doing and what feels right for you.
Yeah.
But so talking more about, to your point about character development, about writing itself, you, let's just say you've gotten the first draft of a story done. You've gone through, you have obsessively edited every chapter that is in this first draft. Now what? Do you go back through again? Do you work with beta readers? Would you go into that a bit more?
I've used beta readers. I haven't used a beta reading service, which there are a few out there which are very good. In fact, I do reading for, for a beta service. I do use critique partners, and sometimes it's a chapter, a couple of chapters at a time as I'm writing, and then I edit that contributes to my editing process. I've used a developmental editor before, and my publisher has a great editing process. So even once it's done and I've gone through critiquing, they use a content editor, a copy editor, a line editor, and so it really gets polished.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So to your point, the way your publisher has worked with you for your manuscript, how has for instance, the content editor provided feedback that has been instrumental to you? I mean, a lot of times people assume editing is copy and proof type of thing.
Yeah.
They don't always hear about other types. And so would you talk a bit about how the content editing in particular was instrumental in your process and what you created?
Well, it's been fabulous so far. I mean, they're very, very detailed. I mean, you'll get like 30 pages single spaced of chapter 1 says this, it might work better if you took this angle, and you just have to go through. And as a writer, I think almost every writer's first impulse is, what? No way, I'm not changing that. But if you really sit with it and let it simmer, digest, in the end, I'd have to say 80 to 90% of the time you end up going, okay, I see your point. I need to polish this, change this a little bit. So it's been a really good experience. I mean, everybody needs editing. And I mean, editing from more than just one place. Critique partners are a form of editing. And you just have to take all that, put it in. And in the end, I mean, it really does. It takes a village to write a book. It's not a one-person process, unless, I don't know, maybe you're Stephen King or something.
No, but I've heard it said before too that it does take a village to bring this book into the world. And
Yeah.
but I'm glad that you've said that, because sometimes people can feel, especially if they're the writer, that it might feel a bit lonely. Like how will this actually happen? And I look at that where the first draft is really between you and yourself and that paper. Like you're figuring out what that's going to be.
Yeah.
But as you gain traction, as you gain the picture that starts to come together, you start to bring more people in, but those people do help you to shape and to get
Absolutely.
that story out.
You cannot see it. You can't be an objective observer or an objective critique partner for yourself. You just can't. You can read something 1,000 times and then you show it to somebody else and they'll point out something that is so incredibly obvious, or it should have been. And so you make that change. But yeah, I love the whole process. I love writing. I love words. I actually love editing more than writing. Once the thing is done, I love the process of going back and making it better, changing some things, introducing aspects that I haven't thought of before. That's really my favorite part.
Really? I know. I love hearing that, because actually you're one of the first people that I've heard to really talk about it in that way, to say, I love editing my work. So please, would you talk a little bit? I mean, and I know your background helps you with that too, but would you
Yeah,
please talk a little bit more about that? Maybe you have some tips or some suggestions for someone to help them ease into and say, I can like this too.
I don't know. There's just something daunting about looking at a blank page and trying to fill it in. Everybody does it. Some people find it easier than others. I'm not one of those people. But once I've got, I don't know, 80,000 words down and I can go back and look at it, it's just, I don't know, it's a very satisfying feeling to me to be able to see what I've done and be able to try anyway to make it better. That is when I really feel a sense of accomplishment, not the actual first draft.
I think that's really, again, it sounds like another element of how you kind of go against the grain just a little bit because
Yes.
yeah, but I think that's cool. I really do. I think that that's really cool. So when you are, some of the things you've just alluded to though are about getting feedback
Mhm.
and understanding when to take that feedback or when it's thank you, but I'm not applying that.
Yeah.
How do you gauge that dance? How do you balance between, yes, that's good feedback to take and to synthesize it and do something, or to say, "Mm, thanks, but not here or not this one."
I guess you really have to have a feel for what you want your story to say. With my content editor, with When Robins Appear, there were a couple of things that I was like, no, that's not really what I want to do, and that she was fine with it. It's like as long as I had a rational explanation as to why I wanted to keep it that way. Um, you just have to know your story, and if you're dealing with not a professional editor but a critique partner or a beta reader, especially beta readers, um, you really have to take it with a grain of salt because you just, I don't know, unless they're a professional and they've got experience with this, you have to make the final decision as to what you want to end up in your story because they can end up, somebody else can end up steering it in a very wrong direction if you're not careful.
So being true to your voice and true
Yeah,
to the story and to the message you want to tell, it's just,
absolutely.
yeah, it's so important. That is 100% true. So so it sounds like you're working on something else.
Yes, I'm on the content edit stage, and the content editor made some pretty radical suggestions, which it took me about a week to calm down. But
That's fair.
yeah, but I think she might have been right, and so I'm making some pretty major adjustments to the story. Still the same story.
Mhm.
I think maybe the tone of voice is a little different. And I actually am switching POV, which is a very tedious process if you've ever done that before. Um, but yeah, it's this story of a celebrity stalker and how just an innocent girl gets tangled up and becomes the target of this stalker. And again, I did a lot of research for this story. I interviewed a psychologist in California who actually has provided testimony for celebrity stalkers, you know, in
Oh,
court cases. So that was really interesting. And he told, before he would even talk to me, he said, I'd like for you to read my book. So I had to go to the library, get it through interlibrary exchange because they didn't have it there. And I read his book, and it was a lot of creepy stuff, but it really helped a
yeah.
lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Good. So, to your point though about switching points of view,
Mhm.
how, so when you started your book, you started with one and now switching, obviously. How does that feel to do that? I mean, I realize to your point, like the mechanics of it and thinking through, I'm changing this pronoun or I'm changing the way this is phrased, but how does that feel in the feeling of the book to you as the writer coming from a different point of view originally?
Well, it started out in first person, you know, I this and I that. And I decided to do it in third POV close. It, I don't know, it has a little bit more gravitas to it in third person, I think.
Mhm.
And because the topic is serious, there's a relationship in the story, and it's an important aspect. But I just thought that to make the impact of what's happening seem really horrifying, third person just seemed to work better for some reason.
No, but I like the point that you're making in that sometimes first person can give you that creep factor or that feeling that you're right involved with that reader or that character rather. And then sometimes shifting the point of view to third person or even second, however the POV changes, but that
Yeah,
POV change can help create a different feeling in the book. And that creates a whole new experience for you writing, but also for the reader.
exactly. It is tedious and it's going to take me a while to get through, but for some reason, and I can't really articulate why, I just think that the third person is working better.
Very cool. Any idea when this new book will come out?
Well, it depends on how slow I am with incorporating the content edits.
Fair enough.
I'm only like on chapter 5 or something. So
That's okay.
after I turn it in and it goes through a second round, I'll have a better idea. With any
Very
luck, it might be the end of the year, but I'm thinking it'll be 2023.
how cool though. That's still really exciting.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Densie, this has been great. I have so enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, me too.
Where can people connect with you and where can they get your book? And where can they find
Um,
out when your new one's coming out?
Well, if you follow me on BookBub, you will get a notice when the new one is coming out. That's I don't know. I think it's just Densie Webb. If you type in Densie Webb at BookBub, not Denise, but Densie, you'll find my page and you can follow me there. I'm on Instagram, Densie Webb Books. Twitter is DL Webb. Um, Facebook, of course, just Densie Webb author. And the book, When Robins Appear, is pretty much everywhere. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Apple, Target. Yeah, if you just search it, you can find it pretty much everywhere. It's available as audiobook too. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Densie. This has been a blast.
thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate it.